Hello and welcome to this afternoon briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I'm Jonathan Beck, Director of Content. Our guest today is Dr. Dina Lisnyansky, and our topic is Syria. Lisnyansky is a scholar of political Islam and Islam in Europe and in Central Asia. She's a lecturer at the Tel Aviv University in the master's program in the Department of Middle Eastern and African Studies. She also teaches at the Rafael Recanati International School at Reichman University and at the Shalem College. She is a research fellow at the European Union's Institute for Migration and Security Research and the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, ISGAP, of which we presented a report several months ago. Finally, Lisnyansky is a member of Forum Dvorah, a non-partisan non-profit NGO promoting the equal representation of women in key decision-making positions, of which our CEO, Talia Fleissig, is also a member. Hello, Dr. Lisnyansky, and thank you for joining us today.
Lisnyansky, thank you.
Lisnyansky. Okay, I'll keep to the correct spelling. Okay, thank you. So we have a lot to discuss today. Obviously, it's Syria, and we'll try to keep to the time frame. The questions I would like to present to you before I pass on the mic to you is, what do we know about the fate of ousted President Bashar Assad? There were rumors that he was actually taken out on orders from Erdogan. I would also like to hear your thoughts on the makeup of the different groups of the rebels and how all this stuff meets Israel from a security and diplomatic perspective. So here's to you, Dr. Lisnyansky. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. So regarding Assad's fate, we don't know much. We do know that during this morning, early morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning, the rebels wrote on their Telegram channels that his plane was probably intercepted by them near Homs. And then there were several notions regarding the fact that he was trying to flee the country from Damascus via plane to somewhere. We don't know where. We do know that his family is in Russia right now. We do know that he was in Russia a few days ago, and after that he went to the Emirates. So there was a bit of a few attempts to at least save his family. Also, we do know that his brothers-in-law are right now in Dubai. So we do not know whether Assad is alive or not, but according to the rebels, he's not alive. So again, not vetted yet. This is just a rumor. Of course, not much to say about that. So regarding to the rebels themselves, the groups, I think this is highly interesting because we are if we break it down, we will see three main groups. The first group are the Islamists. They are the Salafis, fundamentalists, which are a lot like Al-Qaeda in all its, circulations. We can see that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the main group headed by Mohammed al-Julani, known to us from the beginning of the civil war in Syria. Al-Julani is back, and he is the leader of this particular insurgency. So we see that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that used to be Jabhat al-Nusra, which was, by the way, a branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria at the time. But today they seem to be, I'm repeating myself, seem to be, I'm stressing this out, very pragmatic. Meaning they have their ideology. They are talking about, obviously, all kinds of Quranic verses that are depicting the current insurgency as a gift from Allah, of course. But with that, they are showing us a certain way of personal restraint, unlike ISIS at the time, when they are interacting with different groups without committing horrible atrocities, at least not documented. Okay, so as far as we can see now, they have approached several ethnical groups in Syria, also the Alawites, by the way, and told them that if they are willing to stop the fighting against them, especially Assad's army, Assad's soldiers, they are willing to let them go, not to fight them and not to imprison them, which is really something that is different from the way they used to wage war, at least during the civil war until 2019. Now, the group is also, it's like an umbrella organization, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they have a lot of organizations which are under their, I would say, a patronage. We have organizations there that include recruits from all over the world. And we are talking mostly about people from the post-Soviet region. When we speak about basically people from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and sometimes from the Russian Federation itself, from Dagestan, for instance, those are very, very idealist Salafis, highly extremist, highly radical, and they are in fact part of Giuliani's army, of his extended army. They were all recruited by Turkey, and by the way, Turkey is the one that is, standing behind this insurgency, and the one that is funding this insurgency as well. And Turkey was the one who even built a kind of a military base for these new recruits that come from all kinds of regions, not just from the post-Soviet region, but also from Algeria and Tunisia, and of course the Balkans, etc., etc. So Turkey, in fact, accommodated them in a kind of improvised military base not far from Afrin, which is near its own border in Syria. And they were just sitting there waiting until the timing is right. And at a certain point, as we can see, the timing was right. And we will speak about this timing in a second after I break down the groups of insurgents a little bit more. So the first group is Salafis. We're talking about Muslim fundamentalists. The second group is Kurds. And Kurds have control, they've established control now over all of the eastern part of Syria, not far from the border of Iraq. In fact, they are the ones who are controlling the border with Iraq right now, and they are in charge of a very important strategic point of Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor was controlled for a couple of months or even more by the Iranis, and the Iranis were moving through Deir ez-Zor from Iraq to Syria and to Hezbollah, by the way. A lot of weapons, a lot of militias. The Shiites militias were moving through this specific point on the border. And Deir ez-Zor is also a place that was controlled by various groups even before the Iranians. We're talking about a place that was controlled at some point during this time period by the Russians as well, and by, of course, Assad regime. And we see that this specific area is transformed during the past at least decade. So here we can see two groups. The third group are Druze. And Druze are the ones, especially Druze from Sueda, which is in the southern part of Syria. They managed to gain control over all of the southern part of Syria. Even 2 days ago, Druze were the ones that managed to gain control over not just Sueda and Khadar, etc., but also over the Dara region, which is highly important, also because it's symbolic, not just because it's considered to be a strategic region, but it's also very symbolic because Dara was the region where the first insurgency in 2011 has originated. So the civil war in Syria started from Dara, and it's highly symbolic that it also ends in Dara. We can see it now. So we are talking about three main groups. The first are the Salafis, Islamists, that are backed up by Turkey. The second group are Kurds, and the third group is Druze. So now the Druze and the insurgents from the Salafi group have met in Damascus, and we will see the way they will be, trying to divide Syria among themselves, or perhaps, as Al-Julani, the leader of the Salafis, already suggested, he wants to establish a new government, a new free Syria that has a place for all the groups, ethnic, whether they're ethnic or religious or all kinds of groups. I mean, the way he speaks about Syria right now, it seems that he aims to gain more control without military power, but more cooperation with the local groups in Syria, with all of them.
Okay, thank you for this very detailed and in-depth introduction. So now that I wanted to ask you about Al-Julani, because in his DNA, he's got like the Al-Qaeda and the Islamist upbringing, let's put it this way. And the statements coming from him and from his associates, like they took over national TV station today, and they issued a statement which is very inclusive, people who lay down their arms should not be harmed, etc., as you said. And just really breaking recently, our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to the border of the Golan Heights, and he had a quote there where he almost echoes him. He says, "We are working for a policy of being good neighbors, just as we did when we established the hospital." And he mentions, we send a hand of peace, first of all, to our Jews neighbors, and then also to the Christians and the Muslims. So can you say, maybe in your assessment, in what opinion is there an opportunity here for Julani? First of all, is Julani a leader that can grow to become kind of Assad's replacement, or is he like this kind of warlord who's going to make way, in your opinion, of course, to a different type of politician? And secondly, is he a guy that can, that Israel can make deals with, that the US can make deals with?
So you're basically asking whether he's more pragmatic or idealist, right? Or the Islamic ideology has more to do with what he is planning, right? So if I
I
understand.
assume it's not based on reading, Jefferson and Washington that he expresses himself in this way, but the question is, to what extent is this kind of playing to Western ears, or is it a genuine approach from him?
This is a very good question. I think we're all asking the same question now, whether he's being sincere when he, in fact, says that he means peace. And this is exactly what he said. He said, I do not only mean peace within Syria. A couple of days ago, I mean, even before they captured Damascus, we saw him after after they've entered Hama, which was the second most important point after Aleppo. They've entered Hama, and then he had a huge interview where he said that we are seeking peace not only within Syria, with all its parts, but also with our neighbors. And he mentioned Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel. And this is important because it does say that, at least from what it seems right now, he is interested in showing some kind of maybe intent for cooperation, possible cooperation. I just want to point out that even though it seems very nice now, we know that in 1979, when there was a revolution in Iran, in fact, there was, as we know, there were a lot of all kinds of fractions within the parliament, within the Iranian parliament itself, and the new government, in fact, included many non-extremist reformists and liberals. And after about half a year, 6 months or so, half of the government, they found themselves out of it, basically leaving the parliament only with the extremist fractions, meaning with Khomeini. So now what we see is perhaps, I do not want to say that this is the same, it might not be the same, but we should be very careful while assessing such sayings, such intent being perceived as a true intent. We do not know what Giuliani means now. Perhaps he means peace for now, and then we will see what happens. I also would like to stress out that within the roles of his organization, not Hayat Tahrir Sham, but for instance, the organization of jihadis from Turkestan, which include also people from Uzbekistan and Salafis from Dagestan, etc. A lot of people are saying that at first we will free Syria, and then we will free all of the Middle East, including Palestine, which actually means that they are intending maybe to fight with Israel as well. So we do not know what will happen. We should be careful, but also, of course, our first choice as Israeli representatives, of course, we would like to establish good connections with all of our neighbors, of course, including Giuliani, of course, including the new fractions in Syria. And I do know for a fact that Israel has good connections already with Kurds in Syria, and the Kurds in Syria have approached officially right now. I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, when they approached the Israeli government, and they said that they would like to cooperate. So the Kurds, and now also the Druze in the Syrian Golan Heights are also sending all kinds of messages that are being very peaceful to Israel. And I do think that there is a good chance for us to try at least and make an effort to to just enjoy the situation in a bit. You know, we understand that this is war, but at some point this war will end, and we are really hopeful here to find a good cooperation among our neighbors also in Syria. The thing is that I am genuinely worried as a professional in this particular area that Turkey, in fact, is not very peaceful in its intentions right now. At least we know that Erdogan, a few months ago, he said that if he had a mutual border with Israel, he would already start a military conflict with Israel because of what Israel does in Gaza, for instance. So now this particular saying is worrisome, I would say. And of course, we hope to see good relations with Turkey as well, the way it used to be for the past many, many decades. Of course, Israel would like to restore its good relations with Turkey as well. And if we can do that with Syria now too, it's a very good opportunity for us. I think for all of us.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask you a bit about the Israeli side. I'm not sure, I think today is the first time since 1973 that Israeli tanks have actually crossed the border fence. Tanks, not just troops. Israel is obviously taking this very seriously. The Prime Minister visited. Tanks have been deployed and troops. And I personally served there as a soldier, so I figured, I'll take my car and take a look at Kuneta, actually see the rebels. And the military closed those areas like after a few hours, except for like agriculture. In a sense, Israel is in a state of emergency on the Golan Heights, ready for war. How long do you think this is going to last? We're just going to wait it out and see like what goes where and undeploy as things come down?
I think it really depends on what happens in Syria next. We are not the ones who are leading this specific move, so we need to see what happens in Syria in terms of who holds the territories in different regions in Syria. We do not know yet if the territories that were taken now by various groups, we don't know whether they're going to stay in the hands of these specific groups. We don't know whether Turkey is going to just sit this one out, and not be included perhaps in all kinds of decisions within Syria. We do not know whether this specific event, how it would be resolved. So we need to see how it unravels. We need to see if it goes to the peaceful side of events, or perhaps a new civil war would occur in Syria, which would of course endanger our borders maybe even more. So this is a matter of time, and I think we need to be very patient here and very careful.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna move now to a bit from question from reporters. So I have one reporter from the Jewish News is asking about a report of a cousin of Assad that was executed earlier today by Jolani's forces, and last week in a Christian area of Aleppo, rebels tore down Christmas decorations and told the local population that this year is not going to be any Christmas. How does this fit with Jolani's conciliatory statements? Do you think?
This is exactly what I've been referring to when I said that we do not know whether this message is a true message or perhaps a dual message. We need to be very attentive to things that occur right now in Syria, especially when we speak about minorities, because whenever Islamists are taking power, gaining power, we do see that at a certain point things are becoming very, very difficult for minorities, especially minorities that are sometimes not perceived even as monotheists, especially when we speak about Druze. So yes, we do need to could take into consideration that perhaps now the message is very peaceful, but in the nearest future, we might see something that changes. Also, I would like to give another example of Islamists that the world has become acquainted with their, I would say, what they wanted to show or present as their new side. I'm speaking, of course, about the Taliban. In 2021, when the US withdrew its troops from Afghanistan, Taliban regained power again, and they recaptured Kabul, and they recaptured basically all of Afghanistan. And now we're talking about a new regime of the Taliban, exactly the way it was in the 90s. Now, when the Taliban rose, they messaged the world, they indicated that they are not intended to harm minorities' rights or to harm women's rights. So in fact, we saw that this was not true. We saw that these were it was just talking, like, people sometimes talk the talk, they do not walk the walk. So basically what we saw there was a lot of double talk. It was a lot of double speech. They spoke they told the right things to the international community so that would be accepted. But in fact, we see that faculties of medicine are closed for women. We saw that many schools are closing right now for girls. We saw that women are obliged to wear specific attributes and wearing and specific clothing whenever they go outside. And we see a lot of things that are occurring only in highly extremist Islamist societies. And there is no reason for us to think that the same thing would not occur under the rule of Islamists in a country like Syria. So again, minorities should be really aware of the fact that perhaps they will be persecuted under this new government unless they're included in this government. And then maybe there would be a huge change for Syria and perhaps for the Middle East as well. So if I were a minority in Syria right now, I would be really stressed.
Okay, I understand. I would like to now ask you about Turkey. Go into further detail. Why would Turkey support the rebels without having its own specific goals? Were they the main support? You said they had like some kind of base for them. What's Turkey's interest in weakening Syria, especially if they're both friends with Russia?
Okay, so it's more complicated than just weakening Syria. We need to take a look at Turkey and to understand its interest in the region. There are a few interests, more than one. First of all, let's see, there are two axes. The first axis was, I'm saying was, but it still is, it's the Shiite Iranian axis, where we had a specific territory that was allocated for Shiite expansion the way Iran intended. We are talking obviously about the crescent of Iran and then Iraq and then Syria and then Lebanon. And from the south, of course, Yemen. As we saw, the Houthis are part of this specific axis. All of these are in fact being proxies of Iran. Now, they are, if we're speaking about Syria, of course, the border is Turkey. Turkey was not happy about it. Moreover, Turkey is at least Erdogan, he sees himself as the patron of the Sunni Islam, because in fact, this is exactly what the Ottoman Empire's role was. So we do understand that if Erdogan would like to regain this specific role of the patron of the Muslim world or the Muslim cause, obviously he's going for the Sunni cause against the Shiites. So this is one reason to go into such, let's say, to support the insurgents. The other goal, which is a more pressing goal for Turkey, are the Kurdish neighbors of Turkey. Obviously, we're talking about the Idlib region and the region in Syria that is, in fact, bordering Turkey. Turkey is highly unsatisfied with the Kurdish insurgency against Turkey, obviously. They regard them as terrorists. In fact, since October 2019, after the American withdrawal from Syria, or at least that part of Syria, Turkey was the one who started bombing Idlib. Turkey was the one who started bombing Afrin. I'm speaking about cities and regions in Syria that are considered to be Kurdish, but on the border with Turkey. And these specific regions were captured by Turkey already in 2019. And since then, there are in fact, there are whole regions within this bigger region that are under the Turkish control. There is the Turkish lira there, and there is, just a second, please. And there are Turkish schools in Turkish language, and there are a lot of Turkish soldiers there. And in fact, what they needed now was a specific control on these borders. So they decided to invest in Sunni Islamists that might change the demography inside this area and replace the Kurds in this area. They started bringing in a lot of Sunnis, as I already told you before, that from various places, so not just from Turkey or not just from Syria, and they started relocating them instead of the Kurds. So this is just another step, maybe a very serious step, but just another step in a series of steps of Turkey in this region in order to regain more control, more influence, and of course, more security for its own border.
Okay, of course, Erdogan, if he wants to lead the Sunni world, will need to, compete with Saudi Arabia and even Qatar. But okay, I understand. I understand this reasoning. I want to compress here questions from three reporters into one. How does how does all this play out with, the axis of resistance, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, in the larger picture? To what degree does it weaken Iran? And basically,
weakens.
Is Iran now withdrawn from Syria?
We can say that Iran is withdrawn from Syria. We saw the soldiers of the Iranian corpus of revolution being withdrawn from Syria. We saw their commanders and their soldiers being withdrawn from Syria. Of course, Shiite militias as well. We saw an Iranian withdrawal from Syria from the moment when it was clear that Assad is not going to make it, and it was clear a few days ago already. Even when Assad was saying that everything is going to be fine, of course. So we do understand that this specific event is harming the Shiite Iranian axis. We understand that this is the third tile to fall from a number of tiles within this axis. The first was Hamas, the second was Hezbollah, and the third, of course, is Syria. It's very interesting to see what will happen to the Iranian axis right now. I think the worst outcome would be that Iran feels now persecuted and it feels in a way weakened, which will bring Iran to the verge of a nuclear weapon, because it's the only way it would feel safe again. And that's exactly what they're saying. They've been saying this since the moment the war has started. So basically, we're now dealing with an almost nuclear Iran, which is very dangerous. And I think it's self-explanatory here.
Yes, certainly self-explanatory why nuclear Iran would be dangerous. I would like to go back to the issue of the border. There's a question from a reporter with a Spanish news agency about the Israeli presence on the buffer zone. She's asking, what are the immediate threats in Syria that motivate this presence, and what specific actors are we talking about? And also,
would you please repeat the first part of the question?
What are the immediate threats in Syria, in the Golan Heights, that motivate the Israeli presence along the no man's land between Israel and Syria? And also, she's asking, could these threats motivate the entrance of Israeli troops into Syrian territory? So, as far as I know, there are already Syrian troops kind of in Israeli, right? Let's say behind the border, not exactly in what used to be sovereign Syria.
Well, Jonathan, if we're speaking about the artillery in Quneitra today in the morning, then it happens due to the fact that there was a UN post that was threatened by the rebels there yesterday, and the only side that helped the soldiers from the UN was Israel, that in fact helped them to stay alive in this post, and this post not to be taken by the rebels. So Israel is playing two very, very important roles today on the border. First of all, of course, Israel defends its own citizens, and this is highly important. And if for that is needed for Israeli troops to be even a bit outside the Israeli border, within the Syrian border. By the way, there's a buffer zone there, and Israel keeps its troops in the buffer zone. It doesn't go into Syria, but the buffer zone is, of course, being handled. So this is the first reason, and the first a very important reason, I would say. The second one, of course, is to assist the UN posts that are being held there by neutral, hopefully neutral, UN soldiers.
Understand. Okay, thank you very much. Just a last question about Turkey. Do you think Turkey has any appetite to actually carve or annex parts from northern Syria? And I'm going to just add to this. Do you see a future where kind of different players shred Syria apart, and the map is gonna change essentially? The border of the map is gonna change?
Right now, all options are on board. this is the simplest question, the simplest answer to this question that I can give you. Also, yes, definitely Turkey is being highly imperialistic right now. Erdogan is not concealing his intentions. He does speak a lot about the fact that the Ottoman Empire should rise again. I believe that the world does not believe Erdogan, and the world does not take this seriously. But I think we should take this seriously because, in fact, this insurgency in Syria was not only orchestrated by Erdogan, it was also very, it had a very good timing for Turkey. I mean, it occurred at the exact time when Russia was preoccupied with Ukraine, with the war in Ukraine, and at the exact time when Hezbollah was highly preoccupied by, tending to its own losses, and Iran didn't have its main proxy active. So we are speaking about the best timing Erdogan could have to start an insurgency in Syria and perhaps to broaden his own borders. So yes, definitely, this is an option.
Okay, so just before we end, I would like to update all the listening reporters. We have almost 40 on the line. That a Saudi station is now actually saying the IDF has taken over the Syrian side of the Hermon Mount, which is a strategic point threatening Israel. Just to be clear, I think so far since this whole spiel started last week, there's been no attempts at violence from the rebels towards Israel so far. I mean,
So far, there were not open violent insurgencies towards Israel, but there was a certain way of danger, a certain amount of danger from the rebels that came dangerously close to the Israeli border a couple of times during the last few days, especially I believe it happened yesterday, and then Israel had to reassert its presence and to say that you should not access the border that was established in 1974.
okay, I have a question before I let you go. Do you think Israel would have in its fantasies a dream about, a Druze land, a Druze country that kind of sits on Dara area, maybe even part of the Israeli Golan that would be kind of a Druze buffer from Syria?
I believe it depends more on the Jews than on Israel, but as you can see, all options are here. I mean, right now, history is occurring in front of our eyes, and we are in the front seat, so everything could happen. I'm not saying that this is not an option.
So far, yeah. So far, they've not been, active in wanting to have a state, but I think from an Israeli perspective, having,
Jonathan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there are a lot of talking about this in the last years and specifically in the last months. In fact, there are people among the Druze community in Syria, especially, that have been talking about this.
okay, those Jews people are not enemies of the rebels, right? Because the Jews in Syria have been loyal to Assad over the years, but this has been just a kind of a...
Not enemies, not at all. We're talking about people that are just, it was a dream up until now. Nobody knows how it will occur. I do not believe this is a very viable option, but it could happen.
Okay, so Dr. Lisnyansky, thank you so much for your time at such short notice on such a pressing subject. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of stuff happening in the next few days. If you don't mind, I'm going to pass your contact to reporters if they ask for it.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Thank you
excellent.
for having me.
Of course. I would like to thank my colleague, Matja Sakal, for making this technically possible. And this briefing will be on our YouTube channel, the Jerusalem Press Club, in a few hours. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Lisnyansky.
Thank you.